"Grandma, can you teach me your recipes before they disappear someday?" my granddaughter asked during Sunday dinner, and for a moment the entire table went silent. My daughter-in-law Vanessa nearly dropped her wine glass onto the hardwood floor. The sharp clink echoed through the dining room while her face lost color so quickly that even my son Ethan looked startled. It was strange seeing someone panic over a simple question about old family recipes, but deep down, I knew right then that Vanessa wasn't afraid of my cooking. She was afraid of something Lily might discover. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, 68 years old, widowed for almost 5 years now. And until that evening, I truly believed the worst thing that could happen inside a family was being forgotten. The dining room smelled like roasted chicken, buttered biscuits, and the blackberry cobbler cooling beside the kitchen window. Outside, October rain tapped softly against the glass, wrapping the house in that quiet kind of loneliness that always felt heavier after Harold passed away. My husband built this house with his own hands more than 40 years ago. Every cabinet door, every creaky stair, every stain on the kitchen counter carried some memory of him. Sunday dinners used to feel warm back then. Loud. Safe. But over the years, Vanessa had slowly changed everything without anyone noticing at first. The old recipes disappeared from holidays one by one. My Thanksgiving stuffing became quinoa salad. My peach pie was replaced by tiny expensive desserts nobody finished eating. Even the way Ethan laughed had changed after marrying her. Softer. Careful. Like a man constantly checking whether he was allowed to enjoy himself. Lily sat beside me twisting the sleeve of her sweater nervously. "I just thought maybe someday I could make Grandpa Harold's apple pie for my own kids," she said quietly. Vanessa forced a smile so tight it barely looked human. "Sweetheart, your grandmother's recipes are old-fashioned," she said too quickly. "People eat healthier now." But Lily kept looking at me instead of her mother. That's when I noticed Vanessa staring toward the small wooden recipe box sitting beside my china cabinet. Her eyes locked onto it the way people stare at something dangerous. I hadn't opened that box in years. Not since Harold died. After dinner, while Ethan carried plates into the kitchen, Lily walked over and gently touched my hand. "Grandma," she whispered, "would you really teach me?" Before I could answer, Vanessa crossed the room so fast her chair nearly tipped backward. She grabbed the recipe box first. "These old cards are falling apart," she said with a nervous laugh. "I'll put them somewhere safe." But her hands were shaking. And when she hugged that little wooden box against her chest, I realized something that made my stomach turn cold. There was a secret hidden inside my family recipes, and somehow my daughter-in-law had spent years trying to keep it buried. That night after everyone left, I stood alone in my kitchen listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping softly against the gutters outside. The house always sounded different after family dinners. Quieter. Colder somehow. I began clearing the plates slowly, stacking them carefully beside the sink the way Harold used to tease me about for taking too much time. "Ellie, nobody grades dishwashing," he would laugh while stealing bites of cobbler straight from the pan. For a moment, I could almost hear his voice again. I pressed my hand against the counter and closed my eyes, letting the memory settle over me like a warm blanket before reality returned. Vanessa's face kept replaying in my mind. The panic in her eyes had not looked natural. It looked like fear. Real fear. I dried my hands on a kitchen towel and walked toward the china cabinet where the old recipe box had sat for decades. The empty space waiting there felt wrong. That small wooden box had survived 3 different houses, 2 cross-country moves, 1 basement flood, and every holiday meal our family ever shared. Harold made it for me during our 2nd year of marriage from leftover cedar, wood he bought at a hardware store outside Cleveland. He carved tiny roses into the corners because he said I deserved something beautiful to hold all the things that kept our family together. Inside were hundreds of recipe cards stained with vanilla, butter, cinnamon, and thyme. Some were written in my handwriting. Others belonged to Harold's mother, and even his grandmother before her. But mixed between the recipes were little pieces of our lives. Notes. Dates. Tiny memories tucked into corners. Ethan lost his first tooth while I baked this pie. Harold burned the Thanksgiving turkey again. Lily loved the blackberry jam at age 6. That box was never really about food. It was our family history. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and sat beside the window with an old photo album resting on my lap. In one picture, Lily could not have been older than 7, standing on a chair in my kitchen wearing an apron nearly dragging across the floor. Flour covered her cheeks while Harold pretended to inspect her cookies like a professional judge. Vanessa hated that picture. I remembered showing it during Christmas one year, and she immediately changed the subject. At the time, I thought maybe she simply did not enjoy sentimental things. Now I was not so sure. Around midnight, my phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A message from Lily appeared on the screen. "Grandma, I am sorry Mom acted weird tonight. I really do want to learn the recipes." I stared at those words for a long moment before typing back. "You are always welcome in my kitchen." 3 dots appeared instantly, then disappeared. Finally, another message arrived. "Grandma, has Mom ever asked you for the recipe box before?" My chest tightened, because suddenly I remembered something I had not thought about in years. 3 months after Harold died, Vanessa had asked me for that box. And when I told her no, she looked at me with an expression I had never forgotten. Not disappointment, not frustration, something much colder than that. The next morning, I woke before sunrise the way I always did after difficult nights. Sleep came lightly these days, drifting in and out like fog rolling across a lake. I wrapped my old cream-colored cardigan around my shoulders and walked downstairs barefoot, careful on the cold hardwood steps Harold used to promise he would refinish someday. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee grounds from the night before. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the backyard covered in silver morning mist. I stood at the sink watching drops of water slide slowly from the maple trees while Lily's message lingered in my thoughts. "Has Mom ever asked you for the recipe box before?" I opened the cabinet above the stove and reached automatically for my favorite coffee mug, the blue ceramic one Lily painted for me when she was 9 years old. The paint had faded badly over time. Half the little flowers were chipped away now, but I still used it every morning because some things matter more when they are imperfect. That was something Vanessa never understood. She liked things polished, curated, ready for photographs. Around 8 o'clock, I finally pulled an old storage bin from the hallway closet and carried it into the dining room. Dust floated through the sunlight as I opened it carefully. Inside were old recipe copies, holiday menus, faded family photos, and stacks of handwritten notes Harold and I collected over 40 years together. I had not looked through most of it since the funeral. Grief changes the shape of ordinary objects. Sometimes even opening a drawer feels impossible. I found a Christmas photo from 12 years ago. Lily sat on Harold's lap holding a gingerbread cookie almost larger than her face while Ethan stood beside them smiling naturally, not the guarded polite smile he wore now. Vanessa was in the corner of the picture near the kitchen island. Even back then she looked tense watching me and Lily together. My eyes drifted toward another envelope buried beneath the photographs. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold. "Eleanor, in case anything ever feels wrong." Harold's handwriting. My pulse quickened as I opened it carefully. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper dated 8 months before his death. "Ellie, if Vanessa keeps asking about the recipes, please do not give her the original box. I know this sounds foolish, but something about it bothers me. She keeps asking questions about publishing rights and family branding. I may be overthinking things, but promise me you will keep the originals safe." I read the note twice, then a third time. Harold had noticed it too. My hands trembled slightly against the paper. I suddenly remembered a conversation from years ago, one I had almost forgotten completely. Vanessa standing in this very dining room telling Harold that family recipes could become a lifestyle business. At the time, Harold laughed it off and said recipes belonged around dinner tables, not advertisements. Vanessa did not laugh back. She simply stared at the recipe box sitting on the counter with a look I could not understand then. But I understood it now. She had not been collecting recipes. She had been building something. And somehow my family's memories were part of her plan. For the next several days I could not stop noticing things that once seemed harmless. It was strange how truth worked that way. Once a single crack appeared, the entire picture started changing shape. I found myself replaying old conversations while folding laundry, watering the roses, even standing in line at the grocery store. Tiny moments I had dismissed for years suddenly returned sharper than before. Vanessa had always been unusually interested in appearances. Not beauty exactly. Presentation. The image of family mattered more to her than the feeling of it. Every Thanksgiving centerpiece had to match the table linens. Every Christmas photo needed perfect lighting. She once spent 40 minutes rearranging dinner plates before guests arrived, because she said the table looked too old-fashioned. Harold joked that our meals were beginning to resemble magazine advertisements instead of family dinners. Vanessa did not appreciate the joke. I remember one particular afternoon about 3 years before Harold died. Lily was 13 then, awkward and sweet in the way young girls often are before they grow into themselves. She had spent the weekend with us baking peach cobbler while Harold taught her how to knead biscuit dough by hand. Flour covered the kitchen counters. Music played softly from the radio. It was one of the last genuinely peaceful weekends I could remember. When Vanessa arrived Sunday evening to pick her up, Lily ran excitedly toward the front door carrying a small recipe card Harold had written out for her. "Grandpa says I make better biscuits than Dad already," she laughed. Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. "You do not need to fill her head with all this outdated homemaking stuff," she said lightly, though there was something sharp underneath her voice. Harold looked genuinely confused. "It is just cooking," he replied. "Families pass these things down." Vanessa took the recipe card from Lily's hand and slipped it into her purse so quickly the poor girl looked embarrassed for even mentioning it. At the time I convinced myself it was nothing serious. Mothers and daughters disagree all the time. But now that memory sat differently in my chest. Like a warning I should have understood years ago. Late Thursday afternoon, Lily stopped by unexpectedly after school. She stood on my porch hugging her backpack against the cold wind while loose strands of blonde hair whipped across her face. "Mom thinks I am at debate club," she admitted quietly once she stepped inside. I made her hot chocolate the way Harold always did, with cinnamon sprinkled on top and tiny marshmallows floating across the surface. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked toward the empty kitchen counter. "Grandma," she said carefully, "did Grandpa ever write notes inside the recipes?" My heartbeat slowed. "Why would you ask that?" Lily hesitated before pulling out her phone. Then she showed me something that made my stomach drop. It was a screenshot from Vanessa's cooking website. A smiling photo of my daughter-in-law standing in a professionally designed kitchen beside the words, "Recipes passed down through generations of Whitmore women." But beneath the picture sat a digital image I recognized instantly. One of Harold's handwritten recipe cards. Except part of it had been cropped out. The part where my name used to be. For a long moment, neither Lily nor I said anything. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked softly while steam curled upward from the untouched hot chocolate sitting between us. I stared at the phone screen in her hand, unable to pull my eyes away from Harold's recipe card displayed beneath Vanessa's smiling photograph. The edges of the card were instantly familiar. To me, a small coffee stain in the corner. Harold's slanted handwriting. Even the faded blue ink he always preferred. But my name had been carefully cut out of the image as if I had never existed at all. "I found the website last year," Lily admitted quietly. "Mom said Grandpa gave her all the recipes because she was the only person interested in preserving family traditions." I let out a soft breath that almost sounded like a laugh, though nothing about this felt funny anymore. Vanessa barely tolerated family traditions unless they could be photographed or sold. "How long has she been doing this?" I asked. Lily shrugged nervously. "I do not know exactly, but she has sponsorships now. Companies send her cookware and ingredients. She even talks about releasing a cookbook next year." The room suddenly felt colder despite the heat running through the vents. I stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen window, wrapping my arms around myself while looking out at the gray afternoon sky. Across the street, old Mr. Garrison was dragging trash cans back toward his garage while two children rode bicycles through piles of fallen leaves. Ordinary life continued so casually, while something inside my own family quietly unraveled beneath the surface. "Grandma," Lily said carefully behind me, "there is something else." I turned back toward her. She hesitated before lowering her voice. "Mom gets really angry whenever Dad talks about Grandpa's old notebooks. One time I heard them arguing about ownership rights." Ownership rights. The word sounded ugly attached to something as personal as family recipes. Harold never cared about money much. He cared about Sunday dinners, birthdays, church potlucks, and whether people asked for second servings. He used to say recipes only mattered because they gave people reasons to gather around the same table. I walked back toward the dining room and opened the storage bin again, searching carefully through old papers until I found another stack of recipe copies tied together with a faded red ribbon. As I loosened the knot, a folded receipt slipped onto the floor. Lily bent down first and picked it up. "Grandma," her voice trailed off. The receipt was from a local print shop dated almost 4 years earlier. Across the top, typed in neat black letters, were the words, "Whitmore Heritage Kitchen Promotional Materials." Beneath that sat Vanessa's name and business email. 4 years. She had been building this behind our backs for 4 years. My hands felt strangely calm as I folded the receipt again. Sometimes the truth does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives quietly, piece by piece, until suddenly you realize the people you loved have been rewriting your life while you were still living inside it. Lily looked at me carefully then. "Are you angry?" she asked softly. I thought about the question for several seconds before answering honestly. "No," I said. "Not yet." Because beneath the hurt, something else had finally started taking shape inside me. And for the first time in years I could feel myself paying attention. That evening after Lily left, I sat alone at the dining room table with Harold's note resting beside my reading glasses. The house had grown dark around me without my noticing. Only the small lamp near the china cabinet remained on, casting soft yellow light across the old wood floors. I could hear the furnace humming quietly through the vents while wind rattled the branches outside. Autumn always made the evenings feel heavier somehow. I opened my laptop slowly, something I still did with 2 hands like technology might suddenly break if I moved too quickly. Harold used to laugh about that too. "Ellie," he would say, "you treat computers like nervous horses." The memory made my chest ache for a moment before I typed the words Whitmore Heritage Kitchen into the search bar. The website appeared instantly. Professional. Elegant. Carefully polished. Vanessa stood smiling on the front page wearing a cream-colored sweater inside a kitchen that barely resembled a real home. Copper pans hung untouched above spotless counters while bowls of fresh berries sat arranged beside folded linen towels nobody actually cooked with. Everything looked expensive and emotionally empty at the same time. Beneath the photographs were stories about preserving generations of family warmth through timeless recipes. I read every line carefully. According to Vanessa, the recipes had been passed down through the Whitmore women for generations before being lovingly curated into a modern culinary experience. Curated. I stared at that word for several seconds. Not remembered. Not shared. Curated. Like my marriage, my kitchen, and my family history were simply decorative objects waiting to be packaged. I clicked through recipe pages one by one. Blackberry cobbler. Sunday roast glaze. Cinnamon apple pie. My recipes. Harold's notes had been rewritten into charming little anecdotes signed with Vanessa's name beneath them. I learned this recipe standing beside my grandmother as snow fell outside our kitchen window. My throat tightened reading that sentence because it was almost true. Except it was Lily standing beside me during snowstorms, not Vanessa. She had taken our memories and simply inserted herself into them. Then I noticed something else. At the bottom of the page sat a link labeled Upcoming Television Appearance. Curious, I clicked it open. Vanessa would be appearing on a regional morning show in Chicago the following month promoting her upcoming cookbook deal. A photograph beneath the announcement showed her holding one of Harold's recipe cards in front of the camera like a treasured heirloom. Except now the cropped edges looked deliberate, careful, calculated. My phone buzzed suddenly against the table. "Ethan." I hesitated before answering. "Hey, Mom," he said distractedly. I could hear traffic noise through his car speakers. "Vanessa mentioned Lily stopped by earlier." "Of course she did. She wanted hot chocolate," I replied calmly. Silence lingered for a moment. Then Ethan cleared his throat softly. "Mom, if Vanessa asks about the recipe box again, maybe just let her organize things. She is trying to build something important." I closed my eyes slowly. There it was. Not confusion. Not ignorance. He knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. "Did your father ever tell you why those recipes mattered?" I asked quietly. Ethan sighed the way people do when they want difficult conversations to end quickly. "Mom, they are just recipes. Just recipes." Stared across the room toward Harold's empty chair at the table. Funny how the people who inherited your blood could still fail to inherit your heart. After my conversation with Ethan ended, I remained at the dining room table for a very long time without moving. The silence inside the house no longer felt peaceful. It felt revealing, like the walls themselves had been listening to truths I refused to hear for years. Outside, the porch light cast pale gold across the front yard while dry leaves scraped softly along the driveway in the wind. I looked toward the kitchen where Harold once stood every Sunday morning wearing his faded Ohio State sweatshirt, humming old jazz songs while bacon crackled on the stove. Back then, our home felt alive in a simple way. Nothing matched perfectly. Nothing was polished. But people laughed freely here. Somewhere along the way, Vanessa replaced warmth with presentation, and Ethan let it happen piece by piece until even memories started feeling staged. The next afternoon, I drove to the small church thrift sale across town where my friend Carol volunteered every October. Harold and I used to go every year mostly for the homemade pies and terrible coffee served in styrofoam cups. Carol spotted me immediately near the bake table and wrapped me in a quick hug. "You look tired, Ellie," she said gently. I smiled the way women our age often do when we are too exhausted to explain the truth. "Just thinking too much lately." Carol handed me a paper cup of coffee and lowered her voice slightly. "I saw your daughter-in-law online the other day. Fancy little cooking empire she has built." There was something careful in her tone that made me look up. "You have seen it?" I asked. Carol nodded slowly. "Everyone around town has. Some people thought it was sweet at first." She hesitated before stirring cream into her coffee. "But a few of us recognized those recipes immediately." A strange calm settled over me then. "Recognized?" Carol gave me a small sad smile. "Ellie, you brought that blackberry cobbler to church suppers for nearly 30 years. Harold used to brag about your cinnamon rolls to anyone who would listen. People remember things like that." I stared down at my untouched coffee while embarrassment and relief tangled strangely together inside my chest. Vanessa had counted on distance, on polished photographs, on younger audiences who never sat at our old dining room table or attended church picnics with Harold carrying casserole dishes through folding chairs and paper tablecloths. But real memories do not disappear simply because someone crops a photograph. Before leaving, Carol squeezed my hand gently. "For what it is worth," she said quietly, "people can usually tell the difference between someone sharing love and someone selling it." Her words stayed with me the entire drive home. That evening, Lily called just before dinner. Her voice sounded nervous. "Grandma, Mom is making everyone come to Chicago for her television appearance next month." I leaned against the kitchen counter while soup simmered softly on the stove. "That sounds important to her." Lily exhaled heavily. "She keeps practicing stories about Grandpa teaching her recipes when she was younger." Silence filled the line for a moment. Then Lily whispered something that made my chest ache. "Grandma. Grandpa barely liked Mom cooking in his kitchen." I closed my eyes slowly because it was true. Harold always believed kitchens revealed character, patience, kindness, generosity. And deep down, I think he recognized something in Vanessa long before the rest of us did. The difference was, Harold still believed Ethan would eventually protect what mattered. I was finally beginning to understand that my husband's greatest mistake was assuming our son inherited his strength instead of simply his last name. The week before Vanessa's television appearance, Lily began coming over almost every afternoon after school. Sometimes she claimed she had group projects nearby. Other times she simply texted me, asking whether I needed help around the house. We both understood the truth without saying it aloud. My kitchen had quietly become the only place where she still felt connected to something real. One rainy Tuesday, we spent nearly 3 hours making Harold's apple pie together. The old radio played softly near the windows while cinnamon and baked apples filled the house with the kind of warmth modern kitchens rarely seem to hold anymore. Lily stood beside me rolling dough with far too much flour scattered across the counter, and for the first time in months, I laughed without forcing it. "Grandpa used to say pie crust tells you what kind of mood somebody is in," she said, smiling slightly. I looked up in surprise. "You remember that?" "Of course I do." Her expression softened. "Grandpa said nervous people press too hard on the dough." I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly because Harold did say that every Thanksgiving, tiny ordinary memories, the kind people never think matter until someone starts trying to erase them. While the pie cooled near the window, I finally brought down the original recipe box from the top shelf of my bedroom closet. Lily stared at it carefully as though I had placed something sacred on the table between us. The cedar would look darker now with age, and one corner remained chipped from the time Ethan dropped it while running through the kitchen at age 10. Harold refused to repair the damage because he claimed family things were supposed to carry scars honestly. Lily ran her fingers gently across the carved roses in the corners. Mom told everyone Grandpa gave her all of this before he died, she whispered. I opened the lid slowly. Inside sat decades of handwritten cards, folded notes, faded photographs, grocery lists, and tiny pieces of our lives tucked between recipes. No, I said quietly. Your grandfather gave this to me. Lily carefully lifted one of the older cards and suddenly frowned. Grandma, there is writing on the back. I leaned closer. Harold's handwriting covered nearly the entire reverse side in faded blue ink. June 14, 1989. Eleanor finally perfected the blackberry cobbler recipe after 6 attempts. Lily will love this someday. We both fell silent reading those words. There were dozens more just like it hidden throughout the box. Little memories. Family moments. Proof of where these recipes truly came from. Vanessa never mentioned any of this online because she probably never realized the notes existed. She only copied the front sides for photographs and branding. Lily continued turning over cards carefully one by one while her expression changed from curiosity into something heavier. Grandma, she whispered after several minutes, Mom lied about all of it. I watched rain slide slowly down the kitchen windows while the pie cooled untouched beside us. Sometimes people tell lies long enough that they start believing ownership matters more than truth, I said softly. Lily looked down at the box again. What are you going to do? I did not answer immediately because for the first time since Harold died, I finally understood something clearly. Vanessa built her business using polished stories and carefully cropped photographs. But she forgot one important thing about family history. The truth usually survives in the details nobody thinks to erase. The morning of Vanessa's television appearance arrived cold and gray, with thin sheets of November rain drifting across the Chicago skyline like smoke. Ethan insisted on driving me and Lily downtown with them, though the atmosphere inside the car felt strained from the moment we left the suburbs. Vanessa sat in the front passenger seat wearing a cream-colored wool coat and rehearsing cheerful little stories under her breath while checking her makeup in the mirror every few minutes. Remember, she said lightly to Ethan, if they ask about family traditions, mention Grandpa Whitmore teaching me recipes during holidays. Ethan nodded without looking at her. I watched rain slide across the car windows while Lily sat beside me in complete silence, clutching her phone tightly in both hands. The television studio occupied the upper floor of a modern glass building overlooking the river. Everything inside smelled faintly of expensive coffee and fresh paint. Young assistants wearing headsets hurried through hallways carrying makeup kits and clipboards, while giant television screens flashed bright advertisements overhead. Vanessa looked perfectly comfortable there, almost transformed. She greeted producers with polished smiles and spoke confidently about branding partnerships, cookbook launches, and audience engagement numbers. Listening to her felt surreal somehow, as though she had built an entirely new version of herself using pieces stolen from people who no longer defended their own memories. While Vanessa prepared backstage, a production assistant led the rest of us toward a small waiting area beside the studio audience. Lily sat close beside me, twisting her bracelet nervously. Grandma, she whispered, I brought the photos and the recipe cards. I glanced toward the leather folder resting carefully in her lap. Inside sat everything we had gathered over the past 2 weeks. Harold's handwritten notes, old family photographs, dated recipe cards, even a short home video Lily discovered on an old camcorder tape showing Harold standing beside me during Thanksgiving 20 years earlier saying proudly into the camera, "Nobody makes blackberry cobbler like Eleanor." Simple things, honest things, the kind no performance coach could manufacture. A loud voice announced 5 minutes until broadcast. Through the studio monitors, I watched Vanessa step confidently beneath the bright stage lights. Her smile looked flawless, controlled, practiced. The host introduced her as the heart behind America's newest comfort food sensation. Vanessa laughed softly before beginning the exact story Lily warned me about. My late father-in-law taught me these recipes years ago, she said warmly. Cooking became the glue that held our family together. Beside me, Lily lowered her eyes toward the folder in her lap. I could see disappointment settling heavily across her face, deeper than anger. This was no longer about recipes. It was about realizing someone you love could reshape truth so easily if applause waited on the other side of it. Halfway through the interview, the host smiled brightly and asked whether Vanessa had any family members in the audience today. Vanessa immediately pointed toward us. Cameras turned. Studio lights shifted. Giant screens suddenly displayed our faces above the audience seating area. "That is my wonderful family right there," Vanessa said proudly. The crowd applauded politely while Lily sat frozen beside me. Then the host smiled toward her. "And who do we have here?" Lily swallowed hard while gripping the folder tighter against her chest. For one brief second, I saw fear flicker across Vanessa's face exactly the same way it had the night Lily first asked about the recipes. Because deep down, Vanessa already knew something dangerous about truth. Once another person starts carrying it, control becomes impossible. The studio audience waited expectantly while cameras remained focused on our section. Bright stage lights reflected across the polished floor, making everything feel strangely unreal, like watching someone else's family from a distance. Lily looked toward me first. I gave her a small nod. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Just permission to tell the truth if she wanted to. The host smiled warmly at her from across the stage. "And you are?" Lily cleared her throat softly. "I am Lily Whitmore. Vanessa is my mom." The audience applauded politely again while Vanessa maintained her perfect television smile, though I could already see tension gathering around her eyes. "You must be proud watching your mother preserve all these family recipes," the host said brightly. Lily hesitated, just long enough for the silence to become noticeable. "Actually," she said carefully, "most of the recipes came from my grandmother." Every sound inside the studio seemed to soften at once. Not disappear completely, just shift. Like a room slowly realizing something important had changed. Vanessa laughed lightly into her microphone. "Well, of course, family recipes always evolve through generations." But Lily was already opening the leather folder in her lap. "I mean my grandmother Eleanor," she continued quietly. "The recipes on the website are handwritten by my grandpa Harold about her cooking." The host blinked in visible confusion while producers near the cameras exchanged quick looks. Vanessa's smile tightened instantly. "Sweetheart," she interrupted gently, "now is probably not the time for family misunderstandings." But Lily's hands no longer trembled. She pulled out one of Harold's original recipe cards and held it carefully toward the nearest camera operator. "My grandfather wrote notes on the backs," she explained. "My mom only photographed the front sides." One of the producers stepped forward uncertainly while the host motioned curiously for the card. Within seconds, the overhead studio monitor displayed Harold's faded handwriting across the giant screen behind Vanessa. June 14, 1989. Eleanor finally perfected the blackberry cobbler recipe after 6 attempts. Lily will love this someday. The audience fell completely silent reading those words. Vanessa turned pale beneath the studio lights. "There must be some confusion," she said quickly, but her voice sounded thinner now. Less polished. Less certain. Then Lily reached into the folder again. "There is more," she whispered softly. She handed over several family photographs showing me cooking beside Harold through different years, while the exact same recipe cards sat visible on kitchen counters in the background. One picture showed 7-year-old Lily holding the blackberry cobbler beside Harold, while he pointed proudly toward me behind the camera. The dates on every photograph stretched back decades before Vanessa ever entered the family. I watched Ethan from across the audience seating area. He looked completely frozen, staring at the giant monitor with an expression somewhere between shame and disbelief. Maybe this was the first moment he truly understood how deeply things had gone. Vanessa kept trying to speak, but the careful stories she rehearsed suddenly sounded hollow beside handwritten memories from real life. Finally, the host turned toward me directly. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said cautiously, "did these recipes originally belong to you?" Every camera in the studio shifted toward my chair. I could feel hundreds of eyes waiting for anger, confrontation, or humiliation. But strangely, I felt calm. Truly calm for the first time in weeks. I folded my hands quietly in my lap and looked toward the giant screen where Harold's handwriting still glowed beneath the studio lights. "No," I said softly. "They belong to my family." The ride home from Chicago felt completely different from the drive there. No one turned on the radio. Rain tapped softly against the windows while city lights blurred into long streaks across the dark highway. Vanessa stared silently out the passenger side window with both hands clenched tightly in her lap. Ethan drove with the same exhausted expression he had worn for weeks, except now something heavier sat behind it. Shame perhaps, or finally understanding the cost of staying silent too long. Lily rested quietly beside me in the back seat, holding Harold's recipe box against her chest like something fragile and important had finally been returned to the right hands. 3 days later, clips from the television interview spread online faster than any of us expected. People were less interested in drama than Vanessa probably feared. What moved them were Harold's handwritten notes, the old photographs, the simple honesty of real family memories compared to polished branding language. Comments flooded Vanessa's website asking why the original creator of the recipes had never been mentioned publicly. Several sponsors quietly disappeared within the week. The cookbook publisher announced delays pending verification of intellectual sourcing and family contributions. I never contacted any company myself. I never needed to. Truth tends to travel on its own once people stop blocking the door. Ethan came to see me the following Sunday afternoon. Alone. The November air smelled like wet leaves and chimney smoke as he stood awkwardly on my front porch with his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. For a second he looked almost boyish again. Lost in the same way he used to after disappointing Harold as a child. I invited him inside without speaking. We sat at the kitchen table while coffee brewed softly nearby. Neither of us touched the pie cooling beside the stove. Finally Ethan rubbed both hands across his face and whispered, "I should have stopped it years ago." The honesty in his voice sounded more painful than any excuse could have. I looked down at my wedding ring resting against the coffee mug handle. "Your father always believed protecting family meant protecting what was true," I said quietly. Ethan stared toward the floor for several seconds before nodding slowly. "I thought keeping peace was enough. I understood that. Too many people mistake silence for kindness because confrontation feels uncomfortable. But peace built on erased memories eventually turns hollow." Before leaving, Ethan paused beside the front door. "Vanessa moved into a hotel downtown for now," he admitted softly. "Lily refuses to speak to her." I closed my eyes briefly because despite everything, none of this felt victorious. Just sad. Deeply sad. After he left, I found Lily sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor beside the old recipe box sorting handwritten cards into neat little stacks. Late afternoon sunlight spilled softly across the room while cinnamon bread baked in the oven. "Grandma," she asked gently, "do you think Grandpa would be disappointed in all of us?" I sat beside her slowly and picked up one of Harold's faded recipe cards between my fingers. On the back, he had written a single sentence sometime during the winter of 1992. "Good meals matter because they remind people they belong somewhere." I smiled softly at the words before handing the card to Lily. "No," I said quietly. "I think your grandfather would just be happy someone still remembers why these recipes existed in the first place." Outside, snow had finally started falling across the backyard in slow, quiet flakes while the kitchen filled with warmth, butter, cinnamon, and the sound of someone learning how to keep a family honest again.